Welcome to this Aztlander presentation, Classic Maya Merchant Sorcerers and the Transformation of Mesoamerican Civilization After the Collapse, with John M.D. Pohl. Enjoy!
All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Jim, and I'm so happy to see everyone here. I see a lot of friends, and I really appreciate your listening in and on something I have to say. I've put this together with actually a lot of you in mind because I've incorporated a lot of your ideas into this particular proposal that I'm making, and you'll see that as I move forward through the talk. So I'm just going to proceed then. Let me just put up my first slide. Whoops, let me get that on there. And here we go. All right, so we're all now well familiar with the expansion and of the classic Maya civilization across the Pei-10 from the late pre-classic through the classic, and the tremendous amount of research that's been put into this. The study of this civilization, especially over the last 50 years, is really now astounding to us. At the same time, we have witnessed a tremendous number of people who have been working on the decipherment of hieroglyphic writing, and this is the more this has come out, the more this work has been deciphered, the more ingenious it appears to be. And as a result, we do have to admire the Maya for coming up with something that is so advanced and obviously has a phonetic base to it, but at the same time has a pronounced representational or symbolic aspect to it at the same time. So one of the big questions, of course, is, and we know what these texts offer us. They describe detailed information about the socio-political system of the Maya, particularly through this vision of royal intermarriage and royal conflict that's been documented so well by Simon Martin in his a map of the different relationships that are portrayed on these monumental texts. We know that these are paramounts, they're divine lords, they have an elevated status, and they're clearly autocrats. The question I face from the perspective of the post-classic is, well, what actually happened to Maya art and writing? And I come to this from a background in media and filmmaking. I got into Mesoamerican studies by animating the Mixtec codices. I understood them as something akin to what we recognize as figures that could be animated, with their enlarged heads, large hands. These are characteristics that we know were essential to the pioneering effects of animation of the Disney studio, for example, going back to the 1920s. So I come at this and have always collaborated with my colleagues in Maya writing at the Maya meetings. I had a Mixtec workshop there for over 12 years with a whole different set of questions as to what happened to this. When I first started in this field, I was taught that there was just simply a collapse followed by a loss of writing, essentially followed by a kind of dark ages. But that is not proven to be the case. So when we look what followed with the Maya, particularly with Maya Pond by 1450, hieroglyphic texts are minimal. They exist as captions for the most part. They're the lengthy texts that we can see from classic Maya, where you can have someone like Barb McLeod actually read entire paragraphs of information are gone, and it's replaced with a new art style and communication system that we call the late post-classic international style and communication system. And this is manifest not only across the Yucatan Peninsula and through even the Itza, the inheritors of the Pei-10 culture at Lake Flores during the late post-classic, but also extending into highland Guatemala. Here we have a mesa painting from Ishim Che that depicts a very common theme in the post-classic, the skull with the crossed bones on a mesa fresco identified as Cochiquel, but it's very clearly connected with the development of similar themes among the eastern Nahua of the plain of Puebla. Here manifest in palaces that have the same mesas with the same themes, in this case, skulls, human hands, hearts, but also crossbones appear as well at Tizatlan and Tlaxcala. In terms of story, narrative, we have narratives in the Tulum frescoes. These are clearly creation stories. The gods are descending on what appear to be ropes, for example, to bring gifts and offerings to establish the first kingdoms. This is a well-known theme in Oaxaca. We see this aptly described not only in the Mixtec codices, but also in frescoes at Mitla, for example. So this extends into the Maya codices themselves. Again, when I was beginning to study codices, I was taught that this is sadly a vestigial writing that as much as we can understand so much about the Maya and their concerns with these divinatory manuscripts, concerns with the supernatural, with weather, with curing and healing. The fact that the texts are so limited and really sort of serving as captions, it was conveyed to me that this is a vestigial form of writing, or is it something else? And that's what we want to discuss today. Now, it's very clear in these Maya codices that they are reflecting the late post-classic international style. We look at the composition here, for example, in Codex Madrid of God A. He has the enlarged head and enlarged hands, enlarged features of a somewhat caricaturish or cartoon-like figure. And it's matched by the representation of the style in the Eastern Nahua tradition of the divinatory codices of the Borgia group, but also the Mixtec group as well. Here's an equivalent to God A as Mictlantecuhtli, the god of the underworld. It's Brian Just who pointed out to me and has published on this that in fact the in extenso almanacs in Codex Dresden or in the Maya codices appear to him to actually be derived from a format that is established in the Eastern Nahua and Mixtec codices of the Borgia, of the divinatory group, divinatory manuscripts, suggesting a profound influence coming out of the plain of Puebla that is extending into and across the Maya area. So this late post-classic international style and pictographic communication system, you know it essentially as the Mixteca Puebla style, but you have to remember that this is strictly geographical. This is a terminology that extends back to the 40s and frankly is really out of date. I know it continues to be commonly used because this is what's in all of the textbooks and so forth. But after now a good 30 years of research in Puebla and Oaxaca, we know fully well who the cultures are that are actually responsible for it. And so I've introduced the term Nahua Mixteca style because it's cultural. We know the people behind this. We know that the style is introduced on the plain of Puebla. As we're going to see, we have a developmental sequence associated with it. Through the ceramics on the plain of Puebla at the Pilgrimage and Economic Center of Cholula. So again, I just want to correct some misinterpretations. I was taught when I got into this field that the Aztec Empire was responsible for that the Mixteca Puebla style was sort of a peripheral or sideshow art style that was largely influenced by the Aztec Empire, that the Aztec hegemonic empire had projected this style based upon their monumental art into the empire, conveyed it into the empire. And we know this just simply isn't true. So this is wrong. And unfortunately, there's sort of been a revitalization of projecting those ideas into the interpretation of this style in these other regions, particularly the Maya region. The reality is that it's actually Cholula, a Nahua-dominated kingdom, together with an associated group, the Olmeca Xicalonca, who established themselves at Cholula in the early post-classic, possibly the epi-classic. And that this is actually the generator that is conveying this style into all of these other regions. Now, how it does that is something that I'm going to discuss in detail in this lecture. So, for example, the Nahua, Mixtec, and Zapotec manifestations of this, who dominated the confederacies of southern Mexico that utilized this style. But at the same time, we know that it was conveyed into the Aztatlán culture of West Mexico. There never was any Aztec reach into West Mexico. So this is obviously something coming out of, again, Puebla and Oaxaca. I've argued more specifically Oaxaca, coastal Oaxaca. And it even extends into the Casas Grandes tradition, as we're going to see. So this is an international phenomena, and it's something that deserves a lot more attention to explain more about what's happening during the Middle Post-Classic. Also, we start to see in the post-classic a much more complex economy. We see the introduction of metals, for example, for the first time, of metallurgy. New forms of wealth are introduced, particularly turquoise, through West Mexico, through the Aztatlán tradition, for example, coming from West Mexico, and probably also the greater American Southwest. Spondylus usage increases dramatically. Abalone becomes a source of wealth finance. Some of it may actually even be coming from Santa Barbara, as far away as Santa Barbara. And of course, the tropical birds and their feathers, together with cacao. Cacao would be important. And as we know, this is the period of time when even cacao is being introduced into the greater American Southwest. This is all due to an intensification of sophistication in transport, especially with the sailing raft, which was utilized so heavily for the harvesting and transport of spondylus shell, but an intensification of river systems, and of course, well-documented routes of communication across West Mexico, well, from the Valley of Mexico, West Mexico, Northern Mexico, and the Southwest that are still with us today in the ritual pilgrimages of the Huichol or some of the transport or travel areas that are exploited by other related groups such as the Tarahumara. So we're looking at a system that is operating, but we still have some questions as to how it really works. We know that Cholula was not a capital city in the sense of the subsequent rise of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. It was not a militarily powerful state. The historical sources about Cholula refer to it as a pilgrimage center and as the center of a cult of Quetzalcoatl. The idea was that Quetzalcoatl had been humiliated by his rivals, Tezcatlipoca and Huitzilopochtli, at Tula. And so he left with his followers and journeyed to the plain of Puebla and established Cholula, which archaeologically has a very ancient history. It's one of the longest inhabited cities in Mesoamerica, but established a cult center here with his own temple, a temple of Quetzalcoatl, and that what power here was actually accomplished through a system of shared authority, it's constituted by a number of barrios that share power between a number of different, essentially, well, they're Tedecutin, they're essentially like kings, but at the same time, they prided themselves as being merchants. and that they would compete each year with all of the wealth that they had accrued that year in their trading expeditions, we now know across Mesoamerica, to sponsor the Feast of Quetzalcoatl each year at Cholula. So this, I've written an article on this with Tim Nabb, who I'll introduce in just a minute here, that is on my academia.edu page. It was incorporated into an edited volume on socio-political and city-state systems in Mesoamerica. And it continues. We can map out the exact same barrios through the colonial period, and Cholula is essentially still an indigenous city. It is administrated as an indigenous city. And we actually know there's a direct transition between this competition over sponsoring the Feast of Quetzalcoatl to what is today the Fiesta of the Virgen de los Remedios every September 8th. The Diego Duran, for example, warned people reading his history and his discussion of pre-Columbian religion that we've got to stop this or put an end to this fiesta, because it's just simply a continuation of the Quetzalcoatl system. But what concerned him most was the way that these mayordomos were investing so much of their wealth to sponsor this. He not understanding that by giving their wealth into this, they are actually acquiring prestige. I don't need to go into a lot more detail about how this works, but by giving, they actually accrue an enormous amount of power and influence over the city in general. And this has been discussed in detail by Tim Nabb, who's spent decades now studying this rotating system that comes directly out of the post-classic with these competitive mayordomos and their saints' cults that rotate year after year after year in order to sponsor the not only the festival of the Virgen de los Remedios, but also the largest indigenous market in North America, with people with a population of up to 150 to 200,000 people attending this market each September 8th. It's no accident that this market in Cholula and the festival during those weeks around September 8th draws from exactly the same communities that constituted this confederacy of the children of the plumed serpent, this confederacy that I've discussed so much in my work. And even had an exhibition on 12 years ago at the LA County Museum of Art, The Children of the Plumed Serpent, that I did with Virginia Fields, for example. So here then is that gives you some idea of how this it's not a capital, but how this pilgrimage and economic center is actually able to influence its these other areas of Mesoamerica at this time largely through enrichment, through trade, and through wealth. So what we're kind of looking at is what we would call now a system of decentralized complexity. We think of the classic as being complex because it witnesses the rise of states with large urban centers and very intense investment in architecture, monumental architecture and cult. But we're really looking at something very different. This is coming into the post-classic, and rather than seeing this as a decayed culture or fallen culture in Mesoamerica, we're really looking at actually another strategy, a strategy of decentralization, but also using many of the tools, the instruments of social complexity that come out of the classic. So this is actually something that I have been invested in for decades, and it's something that I actually, the questions I had that led me to start to investigate this idea of this concept, decentralized complexity. It begins with my graduate work. I was at the archaeology interdepartmental program at UCLA, and one of the professors in the anthropology department was Tim Earle, a famous anthropologist now for his contributions to chiefdom studies and the origins of states in multiple regions, Hawaii, South America, and now Bronze Age Europe. But Timothy Earle was also just beginning. He was beginning to develop his theories and ideas about the importance of studying chiefdoms cross-culturally in order to understand how chiefdoms would lay the foundation for what would ultimately become states. For us, that would be, how did the pre-classic develop, and what was the shift from villages to entire urban centers, and the kinds of classic period cities of Teotihuacan or Tikal, for example. But so I was actually at the time invested more in art history. I was invested in iconography. I was also taking classes in animation, which became, as many of you know, an essential part of my research, and ultimately led to my working quite extensively in media and also exhibition design in museums, which I still continue with today. Now, at that time, I mean, these are early days in these studies. Tim Earle was his primary focus was on the chiefdoms of Hawaii, for example. So he instructed me. I was kind of taken in hand, according to the department, to learn something more about, for example, the Mixtec codices are about kinship. All of these marriages between all of these people that are depicted. And Tim pointed out to me that that's a sign that they're chiefdoms. But I was having some issues with this because, first of all, what Tim's research was predicated on was chiefdoms and the origin of the pristine state. What we would simply call the transition between the Olmec and the urban centers of the Maya, for example. And I really appreciated ultimately the instruction I was given in reading works by Irving Goldman and Marshall Solins and so forth. But I just had a lot of other questions about applying this to what is essentially, my question was, but what about the origin of secondary segmentary decentralized states who inherit the complexity of centralized states? In other words, we can't just simply go back and apply some of the theories about the organization of chiefdoms to people who have already passed through this filter of centralization and urbanization that we know in Mesoamerica. So I wasn't the only one who was concerned about this. I had a colleague, Janine Gasco, who was working on post-classic Soconusco, which is a very important area to study in terms of the Mesoamerican economy of the post-classic. So we wanted to kind of investigate this with colleagues. So we came up with a proposal on decentralized complexity, and this is a part of it, and it's important for me to read this. This is what we submitted to the SAA for, I'm sorry, the AAA for San Francisco in 1996. So research, this is our statement to our colleagues who participated in our session. Research on the post-classic period in Mesoamerica has forced us to reevaluate traditional evolutionary models. The post-classic shift toward political decentralization is so often equated with notions of collapse or fall, when in fact we know that many social institutions actually became more complex. So rather than focusing on centralized systems, we find that the post-classic is better characterized by decentralized political structures and the emergence of new economic systems that served as primary integrative mechanisms for Mesoamerica. We focus on major exchange networks between regions. How did these networks function and who controlled them? What were the major strategies for production and consumption? In the absence of large urban centers in so many areas, what social forms inspired political unity then? So we actually asked then Elizabeth Brumfield, Tim Earle's colleague at Northwestern University and a renowned expert on the Aztec civilization, to be our commentator, and to guide us with what we were trying to accomplish with this. Ultimately, this became the basis then for a well-known and widely distributed book called The Post-Classic Mesoamerican World, edited by Michael Smith and Francis Burdan, two other renowned Aztec experts. But I just want to point out that the preface actually points to our examination of decentralized complexity by stating that this project, which ultimately became this book, had its seeds in a symposium organized by Janine Gasco and John Pohl at the 1996 annual meeting of the American Anthropological Association in San Francisco. The session brought together scholars actively working on new data and new approaches. At the end of the session, it was clear to a number of participants that we were on the verge of a new understanding of post-classic Mesoamerica. So one of the issues that kind of came up in the week-long conference that Mike and Franny organized for us were these issues about centralization and periphery, centralized states and periphery, and these are still nagging questions for how a system as extensive as what we're proposing for decentralized complexity may have worked. So what I've done is I've teamed up with Michael Mathiowetz, who gave a talk on his perspective on some of these issues we're talking about today, but is a specialist in working with the Aztatlán civilization of Nayarit, Jalisco, and Sinaloa, as well as the Casas Grandes and greater American Southwestern prehistoric or ancient cultures of the ancestral Pueblo cultures of northern Mexico and the greater American Southwest. As a result, we have an introduction which we have posted on our academia.edu sites. And you can read what the advancement of our discussion on decentralized complexity is there, together with a concept that I call glocalization, but I'll discuss that more in a minute. Okay, so we know that Cholula is playing a role here, but how or what did it play in terms of the transformation from Maya writing to pictographic international communication? And so let's begin with Cholula. One of the major archaeological features of the city is the Great Pyramid. It still remains a ruin. It is one of the largest pyramidal structures in the world. It is not, many people think that this is the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. It's not. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl is located about half a mile north of here on the main plaza of the city of Cholula. It's been reconstituted. It is now the Church of San Gabriel and an associated church of San Miguel. But this is the earlier pyramidal structure that was subsequently reused. I've written about the cult that was associated with this, which directly anticipates the cult of the Virgin Virgen de los Remedios. It's a cult of Tamawanchan, a paradise over which Xochipilli and his consort Xochiquetzal presided. This idea of using ruins within areas to anchor or attach new cults is not uncommon, as we know in Mesoamerica. So that's actually what you're seeing here. So excavations in this earlier occupation show us that there is a direct connection, particularly through the polychrome. We have a developmental sequence of the late post-classic international style and communication system through the polychrome that we can now, we have a seriation for it and a sequence. And essentially, it was actually John Paddock who, over 50 years ago, first proposed that this polychrome tradition, which is so closely associated with the origins of the late post-classic communication system, is actually Maya. That it is derived from the classic Maya polychrome tradition. So to me, there's no question that these are Maya. I look at the discovery of the remains of epiclassic and early post-classic people at Cholula, and to me, the intentional cosmetic alteration of the form of the skull, for example, is what we consider in terms of the famous Maya profile that we see in Maya art, for example. So we know that Maya polychrome is playing a role, but there's another contribution that comes into play that became very important beginning in the 1970s and 1980s as well. Now, and that would be Kakashla. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But I want to talk about that within the context of the earliest polychrome, the Akyok phase that we can identify at Cholula. So this is a Maya plate or bowl plate. It was acquired by Gillette Griffin for the Princeton University Art Museum. I was its curator for 3 years, and it had been acquired by Gillette as a Maya polychrome piece. And I think we can all recognize why he would think that. It has a face and a kind of a composition that reminds us. It is essentially, I argue, it's a Maya glyph. So this was produced sometime between 900 and 1150. In other words, getting back to the very early post-classic. Now, it's a compound glyph. We don't see any of this in the highland traditions, Mexican traditions subsequently. But this is and I've broken it down into 4 constituent parts. There's a human hand here. There's also very clearly a maize god nominal glyph. And I have an article coming out on this actually in the upcoming PARI journal that will be out hopefully in the next few weeks. And then there is the introduction of 2 other elements that are well known in post-classic international style. One is a volute that symbolizes a precious offering, and the other are these circles that stand for the term tonali, which, as we're going to see, is a term referring to a soul, as well as a shadow, the existence of a shadow of a deceased person or something. So the face itself can be correlated with the name glyph of the maize god that Mark Zender has identified as a shim. It bears that term in Maya writing. It also, though, compounded with a hand, represents the term chi in the primary standard sequence, something that Mark Van Stone has assisted me with. So we can clearly see that this is a Maya glyph. And with it, then we do have some questions about its robust style. And it doesn't have the kind of sense of elegance that we see in a classic Maya polychrome, but it does have exactly the same kind of robust execution that is present in the Kakashla murals, for example. And in turn, this extends back into a Maya painting style that is being uncovered at Teotihuacan. So I have an interpretation for this by putting this together. To the maize god Ishim, the tonali of this gift is made by the hand of the diviner. I'm not saying that that's exactly what it is, but you can see how putting these elements together could allow you to compose a statement from it. Now, the Kakashla murals then play an important role with the Maya polychrome. Then it's not just the appearance of the style, but actually even the iconography, and as I'm going to show you, actually even the meaning and the ritualism are directly connected to the classic Maya. So here's the famous Kakashla battle mural, for example, and we're all well aware of the execution of these murals in a Maya style, as discussed by Claudia Brittenham, for example, in her work. But Andrew Turner has scrutinized the murals in some detail, and has concluded that actually there had been some idea, because they're documented in this region in the early post-classic, that a group known as the Olmeca Xicalonca of Veracruz might have had something to do with these. But Andrew points out that these are earlier than those historical references. And they actually, he's done a magnificent job demonstrating iconographically that Cacaxtla has its roots in the Upper Usumacinta. He goes into considerable detail on this. The objects such as this obsidian mask that comes from Cacaxtla is well known on these warrior figures from monuments at Aguateca and Dos Pilas, for example. But what he really points out is that a lot of the iconography in the Cacaxtla murals is derived from Maya polychrome, the ritualism of Maya polychrome, even more so than the monuments. And this had a very profound effect on me. I found this very interesting. And I would say you can even go further and say that these the images that appear in structure A at Cacaxtla are Y-beam dancers, spirit coessences. And essentially what we're dealing with then in the Cacaxtla murals are not themes associated with divine Maya lords, but in fact are themes of sorcery, which along with that are the positive aspects of divination and healing among indigenous positions and diviners as well. So some of these images are well known. This image from Cacaxtla of this Venus being with a scorpion tail is well known from, well, not well known, but appears on Maya polychrome. The appearance of god El is very striking as the merchant god. In fact, when you approach the staircase that leads up to the main plaza at the palaces of Cacaxtla, this is who you meet first. He has just arrived with his goods, with his all of the things that he trades with as a merchant god. You are following in the footsteps of god El as you enter into the world of the Cacaxtla elite. Barbara McLeod recently pointed out to me, though, that he's definitely got some sorcery attributes. His name, for example, has been identified by Mark Zender as Black His Dark Heart. And that makes it, which we're going to see, that anticipates some of the themes that we're going to be looking at here that continue on from Cacaxtla, actually even into Cholula as well. Okay, so let's just take a step back and look at what this the inspiration for the Cacaxtla murals and the influence they will ultimately have on the early post-classic international style, on the post-classic international style are. So if we look at the Central Payten, we're well aware of the big capital sites, Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, and the importance of these hieroglyphic texts in broadcasting, the prestige and institutional power of the rulers of these sites. But at the same time, and Dori Rentz was the one who first pointed this out to me many years ago, back in the 90s. She said, the curious thing that we're finding out about the polychrome, we find it in tombs in elite centers like this, but it's coming out that the production areas aren't there. They're just the people producing the polychrome are not at the primate sites. They're not part of the industries of these big capital sites. They come from subordinate sites, or what David Webster would call the sub-royal sites. And now that's really fascinating. And so as a result, it causes us to question, who are these people and where are they? They're not they don't play a role in the dynamics that Simon Martin has documented with his map, for example. So then who are they? Well, they are, Simon Martin, with his most recent book on ancient Maya politics, has an excellent summary of the different titles that we assume are associated with what is turning out to be a class of people. You're familiar with some of these because many of you have been following the decipherment of some of these terms for these individuals: Sahal, Ajgaun, Taj, Yahakak, and so forth. At Chultun, for example, which has a further developed polychrome tradition also associated with Naranjo, recently has been found a mural that seems to depict a group of these individuals as not only sacrificers but divine orators, apparently. But I became very interested in the work of Anna Brandeberry, who actually was my student at UCLA and was even my teaching assistant. And while at UCLA, she not only wanted to study Maya polychrome, but ultimately became the ceramicist for the Elzotes project and wrote her, I think, an absolutely brilliant dissertation on the polychrome associated not with the Elzotes Center, but in fact, a separate occupational area in the valley, called Las Palmitas, which is clearly a production area. And she, in her dissertation, I was, from my perspective in the post-classic, was trying to suggest that these are all painted by the sons or children of, or daughters of the nobility at the big sites. And no, that just isn't incorrect. She, in her dissertation, makes the case that this is definitely a specialized endeavor, industry associated with a subordinate noble family. And then she goes on in her dissertation to point out that these titles actually skyrocket in the middle to late 8th century, all the way through the Maya collapse. Implying that it's the increase in the powers of these people that may actually play a role in the dissolution of Maya autocratic authority of the writing people, the Maya, the autocrats with their Maya hieroglyphic writing. So in fact, this is in the Popol Vuh. We know that the Maya maize god, for example, had relations with a woman, and that he produced a set of twins. They had twins together. And then he had relations with a second woman and produced a second pair. They had a separate second pair of twins together. These are the hero twins, the ideal of that Maya lords, Maya kings would strive to, or were considered to be the ideal of behavior and how kings should conduct themselves and the abilities they should have. And it certainly isn't any accident that they actually engage in a dispute with the first set of twins and ultimately end up causing their transformation into monkeys to become the monkey twins, or what we associated in Maya, especially polychrome iconography, as the artisan scribes. So this whole concept of two classes with their political rivalries is encoded in this story. So David Webster is actually one of our most greatest advocates for, and he even proposes from his excavations at a site in the Copan Valley, that this subordinate class, this subroyal class, is actually responsible, may very well be responsible for the collapse of Copan and the dissolution of the power of Yashpa, which I find fascinating. But he makes a very strong case for it. So we're all familiar with the development over a couple of hundred years of this dynasty at Copan and the amazing accomplishments, particularly in sculpture and in architecture, that these paramounts were able to accomplish there. But by focusing on the site of Las Sepulturas, and these palaces in a distinct and separate area, David Webster began to come to other conclusions about sociopolitical organization in the Copan Valley. And he focused, and I want to emphasize that his latest book, which just came out in this last couple of years, which he calls the Skyband Group. What's very curious or interesting about these palaces is their writing is almost non-existent. There's very little. There are no commemorative texts. There are no biographical texts to speak of. Rather, the structures feature these skyband mesas. I don't think these are just seats. We know from the context of a comparable setting that these are mesas for offerings. That doesn't mean you can't sit on them as well, but they are mesas for altars. And then they can be a dais for an individual as well. Now, these sky bands actually have imagery on them that relates them directly to a theme we've just been looking at. For example, this Venus star Y coescence that we see on the sky band in structure 8N66 has his cognate at Cacaxtla. We also know from structure 9N82, for example, that this is a structure that displays the attributes and powers of the elite here, who are painters and scribes, including this remarkable sculpture of a monkey painter or scribe, one of the original twins that were transformed into monkeys by the hero twins. And these, of course, these individuals are portrayed extensively. Again, what I'm arguing is that a lot of the thematic expression at Las Sepulturas is shared with the polychrome tradition, not with the paramount positions, paramount iconography of the monuments. So here's another bench, or we call them a bench throne, but it's also a mesa or dais. And it portrays God N, and that he has a very strong connection to painters and writers. Now, the glyph for one of these subordinate lords that is being discussed, Ajguun, is a keeper of. It's translated, at least by some colleagues, as keeper of books, for example. So God N. And it's not surprising to see God N appear in the polychrome here, instructing two aspirant scribes, for example, about the qualities of and the execution of a codex. Now, an important part of this is a very famous altar vase. To me, this summarizes many of the attributes of this system. We see God N appearing with the merchant god, God M, who Mike Coe pointed out many years ago, inherits most of the powers and attributes of God L. God L and God M kind of flow in and merge with each other, so that by the end of the classic, God M is becoming the more predominant merchant god. But also very important, and Carl pointed this out to me many years ago in his article on the clowns in Maya art, that these are clowns. These are actors, performers, poets, and buffoons that are shown with God N and God M. So there's a triad of characteristics here among these individuals that is specifically highlighted on this altar. Chama vase. I think I used the wrong term earlier. Now, Webster points out that there's clearly from their excavations, that there is a tremendous amount of acquisition and production going on at Las Sepulturas. There's no question about the fact that there's industry here. And so these themes relating not just to painters and scribes as sort of the prestige of the occupants of many of these palaces, but it's clear that God M and God L, as the patrons of traders, would have played a substantial role in this as well. Not to mention the fact that, and this is very curious, is that Las Sepulturas has a tremendous amount of polychrome, except that for the most part, it's Copador and Ulua ceramics, Central American ceramics, which is the tip of an entire extensive tradition that rolls down through Honduras, El Salvador, through Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and even Panama, with a number of different variations. But this polychrome like this is the world of Central America. And in addition, are the remains of even Costa Rica-style metates at Las Sepulturas. So both the archaeological and the epigraphic evidence point to the activities of these people, and specifically the characteristics of these people as a distinctive class. Now, recently, or actually, as a couple of years ago, I saw a Zoom talk by John Hoops regarding Central American ceramics, and this was for the Maya Society at University of Pennsylvania. Someone asked him, well, I mean, if they're so integrated in this region, how come they don't write? Why don't the Central American people use writing? And we're all familiar with the idea of sort of pseudoglyphs as well. And John had a very interesting response, and we know that the Maya are sociopolitically and economically engaged with the chiefdoms of Lower Central America, and especially at least from the evidence of Las Sepulturas, it's very intense. So why don't they write? That was one of the major questions. And John's response was, it's metaphysical and sociopolitical. They are resistant to writing. They have another system. They're utilizing polychrome in a very different way than we might have expected. So would this extend to the Maya? This is my question. Would this extend to the Maya subroyal class as well, as we're defining it, with these skyband Mesa altar dias, for example? And at this point, I do want to interrupt that Simon Martin had actually already discussed a number of these issues in an important Dumbarton Oaks volume that he wrote on pre-Columbian narrative and representation across the word-image divide, in which he discussed some of this and wanted to emphasize that we can't just talk about classic Maya writing as the high point, the watershed of civilization in Mesoamerica, and then from then on it kind of falls away or something. In fact, Maya hieroglyphic writing is very attached to an entire spectrum across time of civilizations working almost on an oscillation of experimenting and working between iconographic this is a diagram from his article, essentially between writing and image making. I think that a lot of this is actually embodied in an Aztlander presentation that Nick Helmuth gave last year, especially with regard to these what we traditionally call sky bands. But Nick has also pointed out that there's an earth band and a surface of the underworld band as well. But these bands and these symbols that are in these bands, which people have tried to decipher as hieroglyphs, but they really aren't. They do extend back. They go all the way back to the foundation of civilization in Mesoamerica. Here's a roller stamp from Tlatilco, for example. And the third element that you see here subsequently is a sign associated in Maya with the term for sun. It slipped my mind. Maybe someone out there can suggest what is sun. It'll come back to me. Excuse me. Okay, so I think that some of this is actually something more of a third system, that we're looking at something possibly more equivalent to these systems as they exist in other literate societies that have to do with core symbols that might be associated more with divination and particularly astronomy or alchemy, for example. But Nick Helmuth went into considerable detail with these, and I've never seen anyone do this before. he identifies, for example, the twisted vine band or the skull with crossed bones band. Well, these are well known to us from a post-classic perspective. Here's another one, a classic Maya vessel with the eyeballs and the crossed bones. I've been studying these and examining these in my tradition at 1450 from 700 to 1450, over 700 years, and they're exactly the same. This is clearly a system that if the writing is falling away, this is a system that they are locked into and are rolling right on through, not only through the post-classic, but all the way through colonial, all the way through the 16th century. So we see, for example, the twisted vine band or the skull and crossbones. Here we see a large vase with this extensive system of the hand, the eye, crossbones, skull, and the heart. Now, the difference here is that while the context of this in Maya ritualism is a little, is not well known or well understood, it's very well understood for us. So perhaps some backstreaming can be done here, but the first thing we know is that many of these symbols relate to the patrons of diviners, midwives, physicians, curers, healers, but also sorcerers. It's a phenomena and an ideology that essentially is predicated on the idea of what can cause a disease can also cure the disease. This is a sort of a conception of the philosophy of indigenous medicine. So when we actually look at the archaeological context for palaces at Tlaxcala, we see these frescoes that bear, I mentioned this earlier, that as probably as even being conveyed ultimately to Quiche and Cachiquel ritualism as well. Here at Tizatlan and Ocotlaloco, this is only about 25 miles north of Cholula, where we have these divinatory chambers or rooms where the codices are actually displayed on these mesas. And what we know from reconstructing the objects to be used with the codex on these mesas is that this sky band or earth band, surface of the underworld band motifs are an essential part of invoking the information system in the codex. I have argued this and have a number of publications out on this, that we can't just look at these as books. The effort by post-classic specialists to try to propose that the codices are simply books and that they are a continuation of, in their own way, of a literary tradition is ignoring their actual context within these archaeological settings. So we need to put these codices back into a contextualization and consider what they're being used with. And one of the primary objects they're being used with are polychrome vessels, the tradition that is coming out of the classic Maya heritage. So we also have the censers for offering prayers to the spirit guides that are the day keepers are using and interpreting the codices, as well as a tradition of a green idol that will move from palace to palace on an annual cycle of calculated to feasts. So this is exactly the ancestral tradition to what is still practiced today, that has been studied so intensively by Alan Sandstrom and Pamela Efren Sandstrom in their remarkable work. And I want to emphasize their most recent book on pilgrimage to the mountain that goes into considerable detail about Nahua ritualism. And these indigenous practitioners I mean, you see a woman here, for example, who's engaged in divining the source of a disease using a mesa together with a sensor. So what we can really say then, by even by backstreaming from the continued post-classic usage of these objects, and particularly the polychrome context, as well as the codices, is that we're looking at a subroyal class of specialized practitioners, and that they have a very specific set of attributes: divination, sorcery, artistic production, acquisition, and long-distance trade. So we're kind of looking at a particular type of media then. It's limited script, essentially labels, mimesis, which we're going to talk about more in a second, together with metaphysical power and representation. So it is a communication system, but it has a very different context to it. So with the codices, for example, just to give us some foundation, instead of just looking at them as simply books and that they paint pictures in them instead of writing in their books, there are certain attributes that suggest something of the metaphysical that is important to how these books are conceived and how they're thought to convey the messages in them. Recently, Davide Domenici has been studying has done an analysis of the paints in these codices. And what's coming out is, we've all known that you can make any color you want from cochineal, the blood of an insect that grows on the Nepal cactus. It's just simply you just need to change the pH of the blood, and you end up with an entire color spectrum, except for blue, which has to come from indigo. But nevertheless, the chemical analysis of the paints in the codices is revealing that, in fact, the paint is composed of flowers. Anybody who has been in love with a flower, even a dandelion, and tried to make yellow paint out of it in their palm of their hand knows that it immediately turns to a brown mush. So just the sophistication of being, and even this is where we get into the metaphysical. The idea of these codices being conveying a sense of speech associated with flowers emphasizes this idea that they are conceiving of the images as something that is activated through flowers, and that this must be connected with the idea of their divine ancestors, for the Mixtec, for example, living in, even as mummy bundles, their spirits are living in a flower world, essentially. So we're getting into something here that is beyond iconography and beyond mimesis and beyond writing, frankly. And now one individual, Katarzyna Mikulska at the University of Warsaw, has been very interested in this. She takes a more semiotic approach in general, but she's written a couple of very good articles about obviously the importance of speech in these post-classic systems, as many specialists in Nahua or Mixtec have pointed out. There are no sentences. There are no strings of words that spell out statements, as we see in Maya hieroglyphic writing. So in thinking about what the images are, and the fact that these images are actually composed with as things with metaphysical characteristics, she is focused on a Nahuatl term, Nahuatl, which she cites a number of scholars working in the field. It's a language of sorcerers, and the principal credential for validating a person's entry into the powerful ethereal realm. This language was the sacred word, a bridge for communication with deities. They were completely understood, the codices, only by the initiated few. Thus, meaning was not directly communicated. Mystery and imprecision, a characteristic of images, assure a magical function, maintaining the particular ambiguity that is inherent in all oracles. Think of the Oracle of Delphi, for example. So we're getting, I think, by looking at these perspectives between what Davide has proposed and what Katarzyna has proposed, we're getting very close to what this idea of the metaphysical is. Now, would this actually exist in classic Maya? Would it have its roots in classic Maya, specifically associated with the polychrome? I think it does. I think if we look at this in detail, many indigenous ceramicists see the manufacture of a clay vase, a vase in ceramic, as the body, akin to a human body. And then we know that the image endows the vase with a life force, as proposed by Dori Rentz in her seminal 1996 article. She points to the term ye or chul-el, of the Y beings, for example, that would be portrayed, that you are activating the image of the Y being by painting it on the vase. I don't think it's any accident. Again, Mark Van Stone pointed this out to me, that these primary standard sequences, and Stephen Houston has pointed this out as well, start with an initiatory salutation that invokes God En, the patron of these painters and artists and scribes. Then the cacao, the liquid that is served, or also the oakley or pulque or other intoxicating drinks become the soul of the vase. Now, we know that they have a lot of visionary substances, and that these are instrumental and very useful for a transformation of an individual into his Y alter ego, in a sense, the Y beings that they can become. And also, just to kind of use an ethnographic analogy, it still exists with the lock and dome. There's no question about it. A number of investigators have pointed out that these bowls that are used in Lacandon ritualism bear images of spirit forces or even deities that can be called into the presence of a ritual, called into the presence of the practitioners through the bowl. Here is a Lacandon bowl, for example, with Bowl the monkey hero. They're balche pots, for example. Now, that belief, I think, can just simply be conveyed directly back into Maya polychrome by the fact that the Lacandon still preserve the names of many of their traditions of Maya deities. Ixchel, for example, is well recognized in classic Maya polychrome, and continues into late post-classic codices as well. We can see that there is an energizing force to these vessels, and Stephen Houston even has talked about the idea that maybe the term Ba also applies, which means literally head or face, but it suggests that the vessel has the shadow soul of a person. We're looking at something that is, I think, even more sophisticated than just simply animism. That you are in the presence of the divine by activating the images in these vessels. That's also highlighted in the fact that they're intentionally defaced. You are in a sense then deactivating the Ye or Chulel by doing this, and this is why I've started to use the term image sorcery with regard to these images on polychrome. So we know that there's an infrastructure collapse, and that the world of these magnificent city-states and kings and their amazing artistic traditions simply evaporate almost. Danny Puliston likened it to just shutting down the power on the entire system. But in fact, we can see now that that this world continues on. So from this connection between the Puebla Valley, the plain of Puebla, and particularly, more specifically, the upper Usumacinta city-states, we now look at the inheritors at Cholula of not only classic Maya, but of course with the cult of Quetzalcoatl, Tula as well. Cholula is the new Tula, but it is expressing itself through a continuation of the inherent power of the subordinate class from the classic Maya. So we can document, for example, the rise of Cholula as a continuation of cult directly from Cacaxtla. They're actually their volcanic eruption from Popocatépetl reasons why these two sites are related to each other as well. Cholula was at one point was buried under as much as 75 feet of ash. Cacaxtla is actually filling in for Cholula during that intermediate period, and then occupation returns to Cholula in a sense, and they take this classic Maya cult with them. So from that Akiak page, let's go into the early post-classic or middle post-classic with this Tacoma phase at Cholula, and here we see even more evidence for this direct continuation of Maya ritual and theology. Here's a typical Tacoma phase from phase plate from 1150 to 1350, and you see a rather abstract. You can start to see a late post-classic kind of caricaturist style emerging in the face in the center of the plate. Now, this is exactly the time when we know that the government by this consortium of Cholula merchant families competing families for power through fee sponsorship. It's a cargo system essentially is developing, and I have made the argument in the article in the book The Flower World, edited by Andrew Turner and Matthew Mathiowetz, that what's appearing on these plates is actually God M. There's just too many similarities in their attributes. So essentially what the plates are suggesting is that there's a connection between the use of the polychrome, fee sponsorship, and rotating government by these God M merchants. And this is the foundation for Cholula's power all the way, well, even through today. So we also see a number of attributes that are shared with this, not just God M, but also some attributes of God N, but especially this interesting kind of overlap with the image of clowns or buffoons, singers, but also in post-classic iconography, ambassadors, merchant ambassadors, something that the Pochteca in Nahua society also fulfilled. This is always a little interesting to us, but of course we have a literature on this idea of ritual humor as a part of the characteristics of these traditions. So this plate, I want to continue with this one in particular because this one really demonstrates that transition into what's going to be standardized as the late post-classic communication system. So we see an image of one of these kind of clown or buffoon-like characters, possibly God M as well. But note that he has a white hand painted across his face. This is a characteristic of the Maya god Akan, as many of you know, also the god Zero. He appears in the Copan in this Copan statue with the hand across the face graphically. But at the same time, he's also, thanks to Nikolai Gruba in an article he wrote, associated with a whole category of these deities that are associated with specific characteristics: disease, drunkenness, intoxication, and also gluttony. This is one character that he's identified known as Knot Mouth, and you can see the bands, cross bands that are displayed over his mouth in the image here from a codex-style vessel. We understand this simultaneously as being what anticipates the iconography of a very important class of Aztec gods, of which the predominant one is Macuilxochitl, five flower. Five flower is one of five male patrons of male sorcerers and male practitioners among the Nahuas, together with the Siwa-Tateo, who are their consorts and patrons of midwives and healers. Here, for example, is an image of a Macuiltonal, but he has very clown-like, sort of buffoonish-looking characteristics. But in fact, these are a reflection of specific diseases. An eye disease, for example, a cleft palate, and the condition of talipes equinovarus. Also, I want to point out that in certain images, the Macuiltonal ecce will appear with the knot mouth, exactly the direct inheritance of that tradition of the Akan cult from classic Maya. Now, again, we can kind of use post-classic to enter into these traditions, even into classic Maya itself. The diviner will set up these are about 3 feet tall. They're sensors. You can see the white hand across the mouth, the yellow band across the face. This is a Macuiltonal. So you ignite your copal incense, and you initiate, before using the codex, you initiate your prayers to a fifth of 13 heavens. And from that heaven will descend a Macuiltonal who becomes your guide, your spirit guide. In fact, all 5 of them will descend and invest your fingers with the spirit forces of their guidance as the patrons of the males who will be using the codex. This is the behavior that we're seeing then portrayed in these illustrations from Sahagun or the Codex Magliabechiano. Of on the left, Tonalpuki, a soul reader, using a codex to prescribe the future of a child at birth, divining the source of a disease through maze casting. Again, we know that the codices were not just read as books. Duran talks about maze casting as being an essential part of divinatory activity, in which how the maze spreads itself across the page of the codex is an essential part of the activation of the inherent powers of the codex to aid the diviner. So but we can even go further now, especially with regard to new developments and discoveries in Maya codices. These elements that we see together with the image of an early Macuil Xochitl are the symbol set that Elizabeth Moon has called it, that are fixing the system for late post-classic international communication. Here are 3 examples: the eagle down ball, the flint, and particularly the tonali sign, which actually goes all the way back to the Aqiaq phase at Cholula. But now we know, particularly with the Maya Codex of Mexico, and especially the research of Saeko Yanagasawa, that this is it, that you are now looking at, by 1150, the roots of the entire late post-classic international style communication system, and most importantly, the symbol set, the fixing of specific images to convey specific forms of information. All right, so this rotational power system, competitive feast sponsorship, obviously the device being used here is the polychrome tradition. But we've been able to bracket all of this, but the real testament, and we've talked about this going back into classic Maya, but to kind of wrap up here, the real testament to me for these plates with Cholula and this particularly in this middle post-classic Maya Nahua Olmeca Xicolancas transition, are some of these other symbols, such as the tonali symbol, which Alfredo Lopez Austin wrote about in as well, sort of the equivalent to the characteristics that are conveyed in Maya polychrome. The term tonali means heat. It's the soul or the day of birth, but also a shadow after death. So this tonali, as Alfredo has written about, can also animate objects. And if that's true, then these plates, these polychrome plates, are a sheepla and a sheepla, which is a person or effigy that can be activated with teotl, the spirit force of a god. I've written about sheepla and teotl in my book accompanying my exhibition at the Getty Villa, The Aztec Pantheon and the Art of Empire. So you can read more about that, but the other colleagues have also pointed this out, particularly with regard to Aztec statuary. But boy, following up on what Alfredo Lopez Austin has proposed, and given this Maya background to it and to this system, all of the elements are there. So the conclusive evidence then, I think, is in, and this is where I recommend the Aztlander lecture by Michael Mathiowetz recorded last year, is actually within the context of what we've been looking at are civilizations and cultures who have the continuation of indigenous traditions today. But they also are part of the core tradition of the introduction of Catholicism, the reorganization during the colonial period. But when with Mike's work, and as we're going to see with the research of others working in West Mexico, we really have actually the direct connection with these bowls as active metaphysical instruments themselves. So in this case, we're looking at societies that are essentially, as early anthropologists proposed, are essentially pre-Columbian. So we have these traditions. We have an extension from Oaxaca into West Mexico of the late post-classic international style and symbol set, Codex style imagery. This extends in its own way. It certainly has a Mimbres connection to it, but in its own way is a continuation of this from the Aztatlán tradition. But I also want to point out that we're seeing, even this far to the north, the west and the north, the sky band motifs are just rolling right through this. So if they know how to do sky bands, then they know what writing is as well. But they are, just as John Hoops pointed out to us, they're resisting this. They're very interested in this particular form of communication. And in this case, for example, on Casas Grande's face, we even have a symbol that is known in the Nahuatl language as Ilwit, which stands for feast or festival. So in his presentation, Mike goes into detail on the work of Johannes Neurath at the Museo Nacional de Antropología, who in turn credits a lot of his research and his inspiration in this research to Konrad Preuss, a Prussian investigator, and also Robert Zing. And what Johannes emphasizes is the connection between, we all know these Huichol bowls and images done in beadwork that are so highly collectible today. But in their original, when they were originally collected, they were actually political instruments. As you'll see, I'm not going to reiterate Mike's arguments here, but they're very closely connected to, again, a rotational system of power, a cargo system maintained by these Huichol politicians in their society, and it all is predicated on the possession of these bowls. The bowls endow them with essentially their socio-political power. So Johannes Neurath has some very interesting articles on this. One of them I want to recommend is called The Life of Images, essentially. La Vida de los, let's see, I've forgotten the exact Spanish term, but it's easy to find. Now, we know that a lot of these images of these Huichol deities or spirit forces are directly connected to geography, to specific locations that essentially represent these deities. Here's a bowl that was collected by Preuss that's called the Bowl of Tate Ara Mara, our mother, the sea. And as Johannes points out, you can't tell clearly between the gods and these magical instruments. Ritual objects speak and act as divine persons on the same level as other deities or human or animal form. artifacts, they are also people and therefore speak. That, to me, that's just amazing, and the evidence for this is remarkable. So what Mike is essentially demonstrating with his presentation is that we can decipher the imagery on these faces, the direct precedent to this tradition of rotational power and these bowls, and source it back to this late post-classic polychrome tradition in West Mexico. It's clearly influenced from the Nahua Mixteca system, and I've argued through coastal Oaxaca. And these are critical to, would be critical to post-classic Aztatlán nobles and diviners and practitioners for the demands of, in this case, with a mother goddess, the matote, or fiesta for birth and naming ritualism. Others probably are directly related, since they show creation stories, to the foundation of the powers that these holders of these rotational positions, cargo holders, become, and they are, as Mike will tell you, they through the vase they become the gods. Through the imagery on the vase, they become the gods. So to wrap things up, the last question I have is: did cargo systems originate with the Maya subroyal class? It's an obvious question at this point. Now, those of you who who began their studies, graduate studies, even in the 60s and into the 70s, we all had to take these classes on these. If you took a class on Mesoamerica, you had to study cargo systems and government and socio-political systems in Mesoamerica. And a lot of this was predicated on research conducted by Evan Vogt's Harvard project and the numerous students, not numerous, but the very accomplished students he produced, with Victoria Bricker. There was Frank Cancian, Gary Gosen, for example. And the ritualism and feast sponsorship and its connection to this rotational government was essential. It was core. And continues to be core to the Tzotzil Maya even today, as well as actually all across the entire Maya region, even across the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, the question then that arose, and I remember being in classes in which we could even write a term paper on this in the early 80s at UCLA, is: would this be the basis for a governmental system of an entire Maya city-state? Would it be the basis for it? Would this explain, for example, Katun celebrations with Stella or something of that nature? This is the kind of debate that was going on. But we know that these autocrats they don't really need to rotate. They firmly have the hieroglyphic texts tell us that these guys are in power because they claim descent from divinities, and that they have specific forms of inheritance that keep them divine and keep power in their families. So as early as 1966, William Haviland challenged this, and he essentially, just because of his preeminence in the field, drove a wooden stake through this whole idea by writing in the introduction to his American Antiquity article: in recent years, there has been much interest in the use of ethnographic data derived from modern Maya groups for the interpretation of classic Maya civilization. It has been suggested by some that civil and religious positions in classic Maya society were filled by a system of rotation, cargo, such as exists today among some Maya groups. On the basis of settlement data from Tikal, Guatemala, it is concluded that such a system of rotation would not have been an effective force for social integration at large sites of the classic period. And that really brought an end to that whole line of thinking. But here we are, we're back again. We all have to agree that he's right about certainly these predominant centers, political centers. But it is not true. All of the evidence is pointing to the fact that the subordinate class may very well be organized in terms of a rotational political system. And the evidence is literally in the artifacts of the vases themselves. So when I was putting this together, I began to think, and I remembered that my sister, who was trained as a faunal specialist, she did the faunal analysis of altar de sacrificios or the Guatemala Tikal project, was very interested in animal representations right at the outset of this explosion of the iconography of these Maya vases. With, of course, it's due to looting, but she was very interested in these animal figures. So she began to examine these, and she wrote an article for American Antiquity as early as 1981, in which she proposed that, in fact, these vases portray Kuch rituals. Kuch rituals are precisely what, many ethnographers have studied them in the Maya area, but they are the core part of the rotational power structure. This is exactly what the Harvard project was focusing on. Kuch as feast sponsorship, burden, cargo, and rotational offices. And the Kuch rituals are known for their performances of animal impersonators on the one hand, and then these black men or clowns on the other. These are the characteristics that we see as core themes in as early with classic Maya polychrome, and rolling right through the Cholula tradition into becoming key characters in the essentially the Nahua pantheon of the late post-classic. So nothing to me really illustrates what Mary was initially pointing out here. Because of the emphasis on palaces and elite Maya behavior, these animal vases and their interpretation have kind of been set aside, or even kind of dismissed as fantasy scenes or hunting scenes or something of that nature, ambiguous underworld scenes. But as Kuch rituals, they make perfect sense. And in this case, you're looking at these animal impersonators actually holding up these polychrome vases in a celebratory salute. That's exactly what you see, especially with all of the ritual intoxication and buffoonery and humor, ritual humor. The theme of Victoria Bricker's book being displayed on this vase. So it isn't any accident that if we look back, we find out that in fact Zinacanton was well known from the late post-classic into the colonial period. Francisco Jimenez's ethnohistory describes how Friar Tomás de la Torre described the principal Tzotzil town of Zinacanton as inhabited mostly by merchants. This town abounds in all things, and others come here to buy and what they need and to sell what they bring. They are very haughty, and they boast of not planting or doing crafts because they say they are merchants. So we put all of this together. We've got all of the evidence for a rotational power structure, merchants, and I would suggest that Zinacanton is essentially operating then as a key Maya port of trade with its connections with Cholula. And then as we can see, these featured actors in these performances, the black men. Others have pointed this out, that in fact this is God M, or Ekchua, someone we've been discussing back in classic Maya iconography, but all the way through the post-classic, a merchant god, but also a clown. But also we have the direct cognate or equivalent in Nahua, in the Nahua tradition. It's his. Many people don't know a lot about him. He's sort of seen as an alter ego of Xochipilli or even Maquilxochitl. His name is Ixtlilton. His name translates as Tlil is black. He's the little black god. And he's a singer, a painter, a scribe, a clown, an ambassador. All of the characteristics we've been discussing coming down to us out of the classic and through Cholula. So with this Tecama phase vase plate, we have God M, we have the beginnings of the cult of Ixtlilton through this Nahua, Olmeca, Xicalonca culture transition. And then it's at that point then we start to see even greater intensification of this polychrome tradition, especially with the now well-known, well-documented interaction of Cholula with Central America through the Pipil, who are Nahuatl-speaking people, together with a group known as the Chorotega. Chorotega, as Tim Nabb has proposed, is just a corruption of Cholulteca. These are the agents. I would even now, I was talking to Carl Taub recently, and I would propose, especially given David Webster's proposal, that Copan may have collapsed, but boy, those palaces that he excavated, they're rolling right on through the 10th century. That this region is now what had been the direct connection of the classic Maya with Central America is now being directed largely by agents through this decentralized complexity system directly with all of the new interaction that is going on clearly between Central America and Mexico, iconographically and not just in polychrome, but even in gold working and so forth during the Middle Post-Classic. So finally, we have the Martyr phase and the fixing of, finally, the late Post-Classic international style as a system, a fixed system. And as Katarzyna Mikulska has emphasized, it has to be activated with an oral tradition, but the references between the oral tradition, the poetics, and the symbol system are fixed in a way like a writing system, but it's not writing. I would argue it's not writing. So we now have the predominance of this Temple of Quetzalcoatl, an entire confederacy that extends across the plain of Puebla, the Tehuacan Valley, down through the Mixteca Alta, down through the Valley of Oaxaca, and to the Pacific coast, and then the extension from Oaxaca into West Mexico, and ultimately its influences as far north as the greater American Southwest. So it's a system predicated on marriages and a system predicated on merchants. And I will close with this illustration of my map. And it's really, this system is actually derived from this system. I had been taught it was that this system was essentially unknown to us. It's not true. By looking at these other principles, we can see how actually the Aztec Empire rises on the economy of this system. It was a very effective system and anticipated what becomes the Aztec Empire. So there are just three statements I want to wrap it up with. First of all, we can say the late post-classic international communication system is not derived from the classic Maya writing system. Okay, we all know that, but we can say now that it's essentially rejected. They want nothing to do with writing. Now the socio-political reasons for that, you guys can debate that. I think it's because those, and David Webster has written about those autocrats had put themselves out of business, and the collapse and the sudden collapse of their infrastructure, and even at the hands of a rival class of subordinate elites, makes a lot of sense. Now, the other thing we can say is it was not developed by the Aztecs and conveyed into greater Mesoamerica through their hegemonic empire. So we conclude with it is derived from a classic Maya image sorcery system, together with a socio-political and economic context of rotational power that it symbolically sustained through Cholula and conveyed across Mesoamerica by a process of globalization. Now, I don't have time to go into the economies and socio-political context of globalization. I recommend that you read our introduction, which is on our academia.edu pages for Mike and myself, and also just Google globalization, and I think you'll see how this is the foundation of how we see this entire system being able to be absorbed by all of these different cultures and even ensure that they're preserved by these cultures, despite first conquest by the Aztec Empire and subsequently their inclusion into the Spanish viceroyalty to still maintain these traditions and maintain these cultures with us today. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I think we're going to have a question and answer portion at this point. Thank you so very much. Thanks again, Jim, for having me. I especially appreciate the opportunity to speak with this group. Yeah, I know we've all had discussions and interests in this previously, and I appreciate it. Okay.
All right, thank you, John. That was excellent, excellent. You are a master of PowerPoint. I
Well,
mean, my gosh, I think you should give classes to other scholars in how to create a
okay.
PowerPoint. Yeah, let's move on now to your question and answer. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Jim, I have a question for
Here,
John.
Kyle, go ahead.
If John, incredible presentation. I'm just blown away by what you've assembled here. But I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how painting in the post-classic period, whether it be on a ceramic or on a book, is that act of um, uh, imbuing the body of the book or pot with a life force, activation. Because I've noticed that on whether it be on a pot or on a book, the very last act is to draw that red border on the lips, right? And
Oh,
they'll
uh-huh.
and they'll draw that red paint, even if it obscures and overlaps the inscription itself. It's like the very last act is to draw those red borders on the book or on the pot itself. And it does seem to be an act of activation, right? And I was wondering,
Yeah.
just elaborate on that a little bit more and how that process would be conceived.
Well, I had a little animated sequence of forming the pot, and of course painting the representations, adding the kind of captions in hieroglyphic text. But that is, I think that is a devotional activity in and of itself.
Yeah.
Anybody who's familiar with the Eastern Church, the Eastern Roman Church, is familiar with the important. Those of us who knew Father Robert in the Texas meetings, for example, will recall that he had become trained in painting icons, and that this was considered to be a devotional activity. Now, the church is very careful not to suggest that you are actually calling the image of the saint into your presence necessarily with painting the icon, but it is it's comparable in Eastern Church or Eastern theology that this is that painting the image of a saint is a devotional act. So I think there's something comparable to that, but actually just much more intense here. We also have to be. I mean, obviously, there's nothing in. Unlike Maya writing, where we've all been astounded to watch all of our colleagues over the last 40 years decipher these texts and how Barbara McLeod can stand there and actually read an entire text to you in that in the Chol language. The fact that just isn't present with the subordinate class suggests that their source of power is in they're in the control of the spiritual, as well as their control over the economic, and that this is something that is associated with them as I'll just use a term because it was so widely used in anthropology. It's and Lopez Austin uses it. They're magicians. Their power is sourced in the fact that they're magicians. But at the same time, Mikulska has gone into great detail to illustrate that the standardization of the system does enable one who is initiated into how to paint the figures, into how to actually use the figures to initiate a standard recitations. There can be variation, as there always is in the interpretation of pictures, but that there is some standardization of what is actually to be stated in order to call in the presence of, let's say it's a person who's trying to identify the spirit force that is causing a patient to become sick, and that one has to then consult with that spirit force to release that patient, because the patient has committed some kind of indiscretion with that, offended that spirit force. That is the kind of world that this is a world of divination and curing and healing that we're well familiar with. That these people have as their source of socio-political control.
So in this case, so if the pot, let's say, held cacao, then the scribe or artist would be initiating or in calling up the spirit force of, let's say, the cacao god, and then that cacao god, who is the cacao inside the pot, could act as the food for a participant or the food for afterlife, something like that.
Yeah, that's the way I would see it. This is I would have to do a separate talk on my analysis of sorcery and Nahua ritualism in the use of codices, because it's a variant of the idea of these being books. It's a particular type of instrument to be used with frescoes, polychrome ceramics, and as anybody who's read Alan Sandstrom's work on contemporary Nahua ritualism, with the cutout paper images, for example, that are believed to actually have the ability, the Nahua practitioner who is attempting to cure a patient, or can cut out an image, and that image then will call in the spirit force of that image to temporarily on a mesa inhabit the spiritual room or environment in which the practitioner, the midwife, for example, is carrying out their practices to cure the patient.
Yeah, what we see in the ritual of the Bacabs and whatnot. Great. Anyway, great. Thanks for expanding on that, and I look forward to more discussions and readings in the future. Just fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I want to reiterate that in my book that I did with Jeremy Coltman on sorcery, we argue that the source of power goes all the way back to before the pre-classic. I mean, this is all rooted in social power that is gained from medicinal practices, divination, and so forth. But by the time you start to get into a state-level society, and that's why I was kind of bucking this idea of chiefdoms, and now have embraced this idea of decentralized complexity, which is what Tim Earle has moved on with Europe, with Bronze Age Europe as well, is that you're seeing things that have and continue to be with us, household practices, village practices today, but they have continued on throughout the society for well over 3,000 years. But these qualities of these societies are based on those. They are capitalizing on these aspects, and then they continue on today. You're all familiar with the relationship between, say, the Cholula rotational Mayordomo fee system today, but they also have sacred caves in the Popocatépetl area, for example, where many of those same individuals from those communities are charged with this entire other quality of the spiritual life of Nahuas, with the environment, with the spirit forces in the environment, aside from the saints' cults and the mayordomia.
Yeah. Okay, great. Just wonderful stuff. Thanks again.
Yep.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Could you please stop sharing your video so we can see everybody?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I have a question for John Jim, if that's not too much.
Solomon,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Hey, John, I'm a big fan of your papers. I consult them all the
Thank you.
time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I actually come from a modern day brujeria tradition from Guatemala. My mother is Maya from that Zacatepec, Antigua, Ciudad area.
Very
And
good.
this presentation is so much more like the tradition I come from rather than the modern day ahi day keeping tradition. This more
Sure.
like in the night kind of
Yeah.
approach. I wanted to ask about the vases and the ceramics. If there was any evidence, you cited how you can essentially ingest a spirit, which that practice still goes on today. And but I wanted to ask you if you found any evidence of the reverse happening. If these sorcerer merchants trapped spirits and maybe did that as a possible service in their travels in these vases or jars.
Well, that's a fascinating idea. I hadn't considered it because I hadn't, from my perspective as an investigator, I hadn't seen that. But um, I, I'd have to think about that a bit. I may have encountered this in Oaxaca and not taken note of it from my own. I have lived, doing archaeological surveys in the Mixteca Alta. I've been I know people who are able to apply healing practices in these caves. We know why they're doing this. It's because social services just don't have the kind of reach in a lot of these rural communities, and so curing and healing is still essentially dependent upon and it must work, otherwise they wouldn't continue to do it. But on these, particularly Oaxaca's cave cults or cave, they called Cuevas del Diablo, but in fact, what they're doing is medicinal practices in those caves. But it's there. But I just hadn't thought about that before. That is something that would make a great article, is to explore that aspect of it. This is again, I just want to qualify. This is one of the reasons why we decided to, Jeremy and I, because there were a number of scholars investigating this, to take this kind of tentative step to introducing the word sorcery back into Mesoamerica. We're all fully aware of what not Catholicism, but the colonial period did to corrupt the integrity of indigenous cults and religions and practices. But at the same time, every sophisticated civilization in the world has got these concepts of constant polarization of light and dark. And I mean, this goes back to Claude Lévi-Strauss, for example, and of a constant drama taking place between positive and negative qualities, and the abilities of particularly, and I'm trained in political anthropology and economic anthropology, thanks to Tim Earle, who made me, said you can do iconography, but you got to do this as well. Of just asking these questions, it would, for the ambitious administrations of powerful states, it would make perfect sense that they would be interested in accessing even the darkest realms of a spiritual world, if it would serve their interests. And there are references to this of Moctezuma having sorcerers, for example, who were working against some of the against Cortez and in other accounts of Aztec expansionism into other lands, using the dark arts to undermine political administrations and things of that nature. So that's why we came up with that book. It isn't an effort to try to go back in time or try to resurrect some idea of sorcery. So I hope we can move forward and start looking at this within the context of what the last 50 years have revealed to us about Mesoamerica, and especially even the social context of these practices as they still are today, as we understand the context of them today. Many people. Yeah.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, but I actually don't have a problem with your terms of sorcery
Oh,
and
okay.
whatnot, because I know there's certain, been getting more and more involved with decolonization groups that are more like indigenous, basically the people that are come from indigenous heritage, and they would be pretty militant about the vocabulary being used. But I got to tell you,
Right.
I don't have a problem whatsoever because I completely agree with you. There's this idea of like a thaumaturgic power being held in the hands of a certain class of people, and they have
I
this psychological control. That's human nature, and honestly, I don't think they've been to the parts of like Guatemala City that like my family comes from, because they're more advocates of a, I guess you could say, animistic worldview, whereas I don't have a problem with the animistic worldview. It's all a part of a larger cosmovision, but I think like you said in your presentation, divination, thaumaturgy, and theurgy essentially
yeah.
make up the functional aspect, the proactive aspect of sorcery, and I that still exists today.
I thought I'd
Oh,
mention,
it's great.
I thought
Yeah.
I'd really quickly that there is pre-Islamic Middle Eastern traditions where ghost busting took place, where they actually used pots to capture malevolent spirits or ghosts.
Oh,
And
sure.
there's a wonderful display there in Chicago of these various pots with writing that was used with an incantation to capture the spirit in the pot itself, and it's really intriguing to.
Oh, well, well, that's really interesting. You guys have got a really great discussion going here. That's a fascinating idea.
I don't
Well,
know.
really quick, in 2017, because we're on the subject, I was at ATM Cave in Belize, and they have essentially their evidence. I think it dates back to pre-classic, of jars being used in a systematic fashion to capture evil spirits, so to speak, and being
Oh, yeah.
offered to the lords of Xibalba. But it was a process because you would think that you want to keep the jar closed no matter what. But
Yeah.
essentially, upon reaching the destination in the cave at a certain location, they would crack the pot.
Uh-huh.
Um, but that is in Belize. We were
Yeah.
talking about central Mexico and southern Mexico today. So that's what I wanted to ask about. And it's post-classic. We were talking post-classic anyway. So I wanted to see if that tradition maintained, at least in that part of
Well,
time.
there is a very famous Mesoamerican cycle of stories of these diseases being contained in pots, and that these it's a sun god, and he's in love with the daughter of a sorcerer, and the sorcerer has these pots, and depending on the variation in the story, they end up trying to carry away the pots. The pots are broken, and the diseases are let out into the world out of the pots. So these are you can find these stories very, very commonly. I've used them to interpret certain scenes of the birth of the Macuiltonoleke and the Cihuatateo in Codex Borgia, for example. You see the first two spirit forces coming out of pots along with insects and snakes, which represent sins, which in turn are what causes disease. So there may be a related element to this. I think this is an excellent, fascinating line to follow.
So very early on, about a half hour into your presentation, you showed the elongated skull. And Vera Tesler likes to say, please note that types of dental inlays and elongated head shapes like the one I see are more tied to Monte Alban than late classic Maya.
Well, I have the utmost respect for Vera Tesler. I thought I had even when I was a graduate student had seen a skull from Copan that had jade inlays. Am I mistaken? And then well, anyway, I'll have to contact her and talk to her in more detail about what she means by that.
All right. And Ruben says, this sounds akin to the transition from the political formations to the merchant elites that have been ushered into power into the USA.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of the politics we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, well, hi, Ruben. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, how you doing? Oh, I was going to say Mikey likes it. I love what you've done here. And I recall during the 2014 NEH seminars in Oaxaca that you alluded to the idea of a bifurcation of a Western versus Eastern Nahua tradition. in
Yeah.
which the Western tradition, you kind of implied that it was more of a malevolent manifestation of Nahua cosmology. And of course, therein we find, of course, the Mexica and their
Yeah.
empire and the dark arts, if you will, which dominate most of the iconography. And I'm curious, though, one of the things I think I heard here was that you suggested that the merchant elites were not prone to the kind of violent conflict that we might see in other periods, but in effect, this post-classic was literally a paroxysm of militarism and violence, and it manifests in the form of crania, bloodletting, the gouging of eyes, and all the rest. How do you reconcile those dimensions?
Well, I think there is. I hadn't gone into it because I don't know quite how to approach it, but the Kakashla murals would suggest that these can be very violent people.
Yeah.
But again, that ritualism is what Mary Pohl identified as Cooch ritualism. That's the people who are being attacked and killed are dressed as animals. And they're being hunted. It's not a battle. It's as we've all discussed, and I think we all agree on, it's some kind of ritual dispatching. With this idea of a rivalry between two classes, I presented it to my students this past semester in a class, and the students raised their hands and said, "So aren't the Kakashla murals the documentation of the killing off of a paramount elite by the subordinate class?"
That's what it looks like.
And I thought to myself, well, I guess there you have it. I guess that's what it is. But that too is actually a theme that we see on the vases. You're seeing, and Carl Taub actually pointed this out with his deer scaffold sacrifice paper back in the 1980s, that these vases are full of imagery of capturing people, transforming them into deer, and then representing animals and dispatching them. And there's the Berlin vase that actually shows the capture of individuals. So I think these guys probably have. I don't know. I don't know. I can't really project a militarily capable Aztec Pochteca back into this class, but boy, those Pochteca ceremonies are documented in Mixtec codices as royal ceremonies.
Yeah.
That's merchant stuff, and if we're, I mean, I think what you're suggesting is that we could in fact start looking at a militarily empowered subordinate class.
It could also be that these Pochteca or these subordinate classes are placating their superiors by making offerings of human flesh, hearts, etc. One thing I was going to mention regarding some of the discussion that Pakal brought up was the idea of these vessels. And I believe, I think it was Carl, was talking about the idea of vessels being a form of entrapping malevolent spirits. Well, I went through a medicine sweat with a Blackfoot pipe carrier some years ago.
Actually, it was Simon, right? So, I'm sorry.
Solomon Pakal?
Oh, yes, it was. Yeah, it was Carl Calloway made a comment to this effect. But I was going to say that I went through this Blackfoot pipe carrier ceremony. I'd had a string of bad luck. I was dating an Ojibwe woman. Her uncle came to me. He was a Blackfoot pipe maker. And we went into the Arizona desert, did a ceremony. I saw a vision, and he insisted that the object that I brought with me, because he wanted me to bring an object that I identified with something supernatural. And it was a basalt Aztec stone head that I've had for years. He wanted me to bury it. He says, you cannot control the malevolence of this object. But I had promised Eduardo Matos Moctezuma that someday I would donate it to the Museo in Mexico City. So I was torn. Do I allow myself to be condemned for eternity, or do I hold on to it and get it to Moctezuma? And anyway, I didn't seal it. He actually loathed the fact that I didn't do that. But then he said, if you're going to keep it, you need to wrap it in black cloth
Okay.
the blue and yellow ribbons I brought for the ceremony, and
Yeah.
I had to pour soils into the top of it from the top of a hill, which happened to be a mountain in Tucson. And my girlfriend at that time, who was Ojibwe, did a blessing, and we did that on the top of the mountain. And believe it or not, I still have that head. It's still wrapped in
Wow.
black, and that
Yeah.
was from graduate school onward. And
Wow, yeah.
many of my friends who know me from that time say, you should have buried that damn thing by now. It's still creating problems for you. Anyway, that's
Oh,
another.
fascinating. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, but you can see that all of this is wrapped up in social action. You're talking about a
Yes.
relationship with a particular Blackfoot practitioner. You're talking about a relationship with a woman who's a representative of an Ojibwe faction. You're engaged in a social universe, actually an international social universe there,
Yes.
all surrounding the spiritual qualities of this head. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah.
And then considering the ways and how, I mean, supposedly some of the royalty, they're portrayed dancing or the aspect of their ways, but it doesn't mean to me that they specifically, perhaps at night, turn into their ways. Perhaps it's a dimensional, vibrational thing, and this is happening on an astral level. And a sorcerer can turn into his way and then manifest in the physical dimension to affect whatever.
Yeah.
And could some of this be connected to individuals who are aware of this level of activity, trying to hunt or capture the way while they're in their way aspect on that sort of other dimensional level? While they're active, try to capture them.
Well, I hadn't thought of it exactly that way, but I think that's precisely what's going on here. Brian Just did an exhibition on polychrome at Princeton University and discusses some of these ideas in his introduction about, he called the exhibition Dancing into Dreams, with the idea that these why practitioners in accessing their why alter egos are dancing their way into another supernatural realm, and that's what they're commemorating on the vases. But I like the way you put it.
Actually, yeah, Jim, I was in contemporary practice, there's a technique to do it as you fall asleep
Uh-huh.
in the culture, at least.
Yeah, I know I've consciously what you would call astral traveled before, where you look back at your body asleep and then you can kind of consciously manipulate what you do and where you go. I know a lot of books have been written about that, and it's a little new agey, but just, the Maya had 13 higher dimensions, 9 lower dimensions, maybe 4 down, 5 over, 4 up, whatever, but they had gods for these other dimensional levels, and they were very real to the, and accessing these other dimensional levels was very real. And so many of the scribes and artists or whoever were accessing these dimensions, with the use of Bufus liquid or mushrooms or whatever. And there were people who could consciously do it without any other thing. So I think it's important just to remember that the dimensional aspect of it. When we had a ceremony, very important ceremony with the Quiche Maya and Momos Tenango, it was their hometown, and it was maybe I talked about this before, but the gods showed their faces. We were at the end of our ceremony, it's very overcast, the clouds were touching the pine tree tops on the mountains, but yet a hole opened up and the sun showed through on our circle. It wasn't the sun everywhere around, it was the sun on our circle. And then that hole closed up and it started to rain. And later the spiritual elder was crying like a baby because he said the gods had showed their faces. And it's very real when they go out the cornfield or into a cave to contact Chalk or the corn god for a good harvest or for rains, they really are talking and interrelating with the gods, really.
Mhm.
And what's we got? Thank you.
Aside from Carl,
Let's put up some.
looks like divination bowls from the Holy Land.
Yeah, those were the ghost busting pots. The Chicago
Okay.
Oriental Museum. So as an example, how they're using writing and the picture of the ghost is in the center of the malevolent is in the center of the pot. They're just one. Yeah.
You put that under your doorway, right under your threshold.
I'm not quite sure how they were used. It would be interesting. So it's kind of archetypal or pan sort of a global idea to use pots to capture spirits. Yeah. The question has been asked in Mesoamerican archaeology. That's what makes it so exciting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think in the Holy Land, about the 4th and 5th century AD, these would be put in the middle of your threshold to catch them as to trap them as they came inside.
Oh, across the threshold. I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then Joe Gunn comments, he goes, I know I keep saying this, but this just happens to pertain to something I've been struggling with all day. How to turn the post-classic into an answer to classic unsustainability. Great sequencing.
Oh, well, thanks. It's something that I've had to look. I have a background of teaching for 12 years in the Maya meetings in Austin and constantly being sort of pointed to and said, well, that's the picture guy. So there was sort of a division in the old Maya meetings of like the people that could sit down and work on the Maya hieroglyphs, and then those who can't do hieroglyphs go to work with John on representational art with the Mixtec codices. So there was always this, people were always sort of making these distinctions. And in fact, that's exactly what's playing out here. And it's caused me to wonder how can I actually make this transition? And also, a lot of this comes from a dissatisfaction with, and I don't mean to go into this in a lot of detail, but I'm not happy with the way my Nahuatl and Nahua colleagues are interpreting the continuation of representational communication in the colonial period. It's just simply being explained as, well, this is the tradition. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that, and I know a lot about this because of the proliferation of the use of the late post-classic style across 100 years of the 16th century by caciques together with the Dominicans in Oaxaca. So there's a much deeper investment in this representation by these elites. These are caciques. They're together with the Dominicans. They're running southern Mexico. With the continuation of representation. And I think it's because they do have issues with writing. And my Nahua colleagues just see it as part of a tradition. And then they're also pointing to colonial documents, Nahua colonial documents that show where they are attempting, quote, attempting to write by composing complex name signs in which they'll put together the sign for tonal together with the sign for Ilwheat, together with maybe a third sign to try to spell out a word of the name of somebody as Tonal Ilwheat Plaka or something of that nature. And they kind of present it as if this is them trying to kind of, well, in fact, that this shows that now that the pictographic system has a phonetic base to it. Sorry, but that's reverse engineering. That doesn't exist in the post-classic. And I think, and what I've tried to demonstrate here is that there's an intentional reason behind that. I think they associate writing with an oppressive autocratic elite of the classic and the Central Payten.
That's interesting because Rob was asking, are the tonali dots the same as the dots in the Maya coup glyph?
I don't know what the coup glyph is, so let me take a note on that and I'll take a look at it because it sounds very interesting. Is this something everybody else knows about and I don't, or?
The dots are the abbreviation for the word sacred
Oh, okay.
in the
okay.
Kuhul.
And coup is K-U or what?
K apostrophe U-H.
H, yeah.
K apostrophe U-H. Oh, okay. All right. I'll look it up. And where does it appear in primary standard sequence texts or what?
It appears wherever anybody's
Labels?
The emblem glyph.
Emblem
glyph.
glyphs,
Sacred
okay.
king of so and so, and the sacred always has dots.
And it has dots. Okay, well, that's very interesting. Okay, let's take a look at that.
Mark
Yeah.
Zender has a good presentation on Penn Museum's YouTube channel. It's titled like classic Maya classic period gods, but he has like a whole section on the Ku'u glyph.
Okay, God's pen. Okay, thank you so much. That would be very useful to make that connection.
Myself, I kind of doubt it.
Well,
But
I've known
dots are dots.
all of you as friends for so long. I know how to negotiate my way through the opinions. So yeah.
And you're so impressing some of your colleagues tonight that 3 of them have signed up to do Aztlander programs later this year. You got Holly Moy and Jeremy Coltman and Dory Renee. They all want to.
Okay, great.
And thank you all. Thank you all. Does anybody else have a question?
I would actually like to personally thank John because there's like a stigma that goes around like modern Maya practices these days that it's almost entirely day keeping or it has to be made up. Whereas like the sorcery aspect of it all is real, it's been real, and this is just more like proof that it's been real even longer than people thought, and it's still alive today. So I wanted to thank you for that because it really shows the diversity of interpretation when it comes to the numinous for the Maya.
Well, thanks so much, Solomon. That makes I really appreciate that. I look forward to actually talking to you more. Maybe I can contact you by email and we can have some further discussions about this.
Oh yes, please. Yeah. I'll just put in the chat my email.
I can
Yeah.
send it to him too also.
Or just
Yeah,
Jim can pass it on to you. It's just my name. It's just my name, JOHNPOHL, John Pohl at mac.com. John Pohl at mac.com.
And Pearl, Jeremy would like to say hi to you, but he's hitting up my chat message. But
Okay, all right. Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you.
People are writing me and I'm getting confused. That's from Jeremy.
You know, John, I just thought I'd mention that Floyd Lounsbury, you know, in his articles on Maya inscriptions, he said, first and foremost, the inscriptions are about numerology and divination and prognostication.
Yeah.
And those were primary, you know, but if you say that you're going, in our day and age, if you say that you're going to do a study on prognostication, divination, and numerology, you'll lose your federal funding, you know, basically. You know, it's so taboo.
Well, interesting, yeah.
In an academic arena that it's frowned upon. No, this is mathematics. No, actually it's numerology, you know.
Yeah.
Anyways, Floyd was one of the last to really emphasize that point. So I'm really glad that you're bringing these aspects back into the conversation. So thank you very much.
And I'm trying to do it by grounding it in solid socio-political. I've had to reapply Marxist anthropology here, where socio-political economic motivations behind this. Otherwise, it's just crazy behavior. Yeah. And I've had quite a lot, and so those of you who know me, it comes not from my background as an anthropologist, but my background actually in theater arts and media, and it comes from having worked for Disney Imagineering for years until these different tribes with their enrichment through gaming needed to start developing museums. And so Disney was approached by the Museum of the Cherokee People in Cherokee, North Carolina, for some of us to organize and to work with them to develop their interpretive centers. And this gave me some unique opportunities to talk to indigenous people across the United States about what they think about their own ritualism. And they know what it does for them spiritually, what these practices do, but they have a tremendous amount of difficulty expressing spirituality through didactic displays in museums or through exhibitions or something of that nature. And this kept coming up with the development of some of these tribal museums that I got to work on. So this also fueled a lot of this interest that I have in more than just simply spirituality, but actually why do these positions and systems that are rooted in this kind of ritualism still so prominent in our tribal organizations across the country? Something that Ruben and I were just talking about a little bit. So, yeah, there's still sources of socio-political and economic power in all of our tribes.
And I just want to say, Carl Calloway is going to do a Aztlander presentation for us on August 11th. And another co-editor you mentioned, Andrew Turner, he's going to present in June 23rd. And if you know Dean Arnold with his latest Maya Blue book, he's going to be on May 12th. So we have a lot of people you've mentioned or who have attended your program showing up later this year.
Good.
I don't see any more questions.
I wanted to add something to what Carl said.
What's up?
He said that the astronomy is really astrology. And I really think that their math is really numerology too. It's all a religious approach to numbers and a religious approach to the stars. And that never bothered me. You know, as a scientist, I thought, so?
Yeah,
so
right.
Understand it.
Well, nobody's gone into this, but I mean, I have a book around here on, here it is here. Let me just show it to you real quickly. I think a lot of what Nick is discussing with these images in these bands, sky bands and stuff. I mean, isn't that a lot of this, what we see in these kinds of, is this in reverse? Is that part of, anyway, this is a book called Symbols, Signs, and Signets. And I mean, we have a whole system of signs that refer to the chemical properties, properties in chemistry, astrological signs, symbols. I mean, it's a third kind of system. And it has a standardization to it, obviously, because it's traveling from pre-classic all the way back at 1200 BCE, all the way through Casas Grandes at 1400. So that's something we need to investigate a bit more, is capitalize on the relationship of those, quote, sky bands to another system of prophecy, and possibly it is the roots of hieroglyphic writing, although it seems to run parallel to it. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out as a key to paying more attention, not just as decoration, but the sky bands, earth bands, and surface of the underworld bands having a particular more astrological or even properties, alchemaic properties of things in the environment. Is that what you're kind of saying, Mark? As a scientist, I mean,
yes.
Our scientists, all of our sciences started out as alchemy.
Sure.
Yeah.
But as a calligrapher, I've always appreciated the whole vocabulary of signs that are used.
It's all in this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Have you seen my TED Talk on emojis?
No, that sounds great. I bet students would love that. Yeah.
It's a new form of written form. It's a new form of
Yeah.
writing. It's different than
Sure. Yeah.
And there's actually a group in Europe. They're mostly multilingual people, like 7 or 8 languages, who are working on trying to make an emoji dictionary that is universal.
Oh, yeah, sure. Hmm.
I don't remember their name. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll let us send it to you if I find it.
Yeah, great.
Yes, Mark, you're still in my email list. You should get my messages.
I'm just gonna have to check more carefully.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, especially those with EDUs, it's just
It gets filtered out.
who's right. But EDUs screen out, especially emails with attachments. They screen them right out. So you got to make sure you're in I'm in your personal email list, or you.
I'll ask my gatekeepers how to do that. Thanks.
And John Daigle says, thanks so much for an awesome presentation and for the fantastic conversation afterwards. Dory says, thanks, John, for a thought-provoking paper. Wendy Robinson says, thanks, John, lots to think about and a book or two to find. And Gail Hansen says, thank you so much for this thought-provoking and comprehensive presentation. And I'm surprised Nicholas Helmuth is still with us.
Okay.
So, I didn't mean it that way. There it is.
Well, I think Nick, I was impressed with Nick's presentation, as you know, but I think he just kind of backed his way into a whole critical part of this of communication. I mean, I was just kind of stunned at how many of these things he had come up with that are just going directly into, across several hundred years here, directly into this late post-classic, early colonial.
Absolutely. I found sky bands in lienzos and codices all over central Mexico.
Yeah.
That some of them are identical to classic Maya. I mean,
That's
the same
it. That's
sequence,
exactly it.
the
Yeah.
same way. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's a testament to the fact that these people know exactly what they're doing and they know what the antecedents are, which just emphasizes the fact that they don't want nothing to do with those hieroglyphic, phonetic-based hieroglyphic, extensive hieroglyphic texts. I want to throw in an analogy here too, and that is that these rotational organizations are often associated with chiefdoms and with not state-level societies, which is one of the issues that's coming up here. And as a result, many African chiefdoms, for example, are arbitration is done through councils, through priests, through rotational structures within the chiefly society. When the British come in, they're interested in fixing power within some of these nations, Ghana, Nigeria, or whatever. So they start to appoint these kind of king-like characters. And then instead of arbitration within the tribal organization itself, they set up a court system. Well, the court system is predicated on written documents. So the people who can actually get control of the court system and the writing system in African chiefdoms end up getting control over all the power, and the oral traditions associated with counselor groups and arbitration becomes dissipated and disappears. So writing from the colonial experience is one of the ways that people are able to secure and dominate societies and develop state-level control over societies. So this can be seen as a kind of not rejection, but rebellion and an empowerment of an entirely different class. I'll just throw that out as something you kind of study in a political anthropology class.
Something I've been reading lately is, especially with all these polychrome plates and vases, like say El Zots, they find that there's different clay makeups to the actual pots that are being painted on by the scribes and artists. But these are coming from perhaps even just households in the local
Uh-huh.
area where the households are producing the actual artifact, and then it's taken to the artists and scribes to paint on. Do you find that's kind of true pan Mesoamerica?
Well, it may kind of depend on the society. For the core Nahua Mixteca area or Mixteca Puebla style between Puebla and Oaxaca, it's an elite enterprise. It's an activity engaged in by the noble class. It's not. It's their communication system. It's what enables them to control society through a communication system. So we always find polychrome behind the highest ranked, the ruins of the highest ranked palaces, post-classic palaces from the plain of Puebla across the Tehuacan Valley, through the Mixteca Alta, down the valley of Oaxaca and down to the coast. It's an elite enterprise. Other societies, I can't really speak. I don't know. There is a proliferation of polychrome production in the Casas Grandes tradition, for example. Does that mean that it's an elite activity? No, there may actually be an entire population of artisans that are producing this. Maybe I would leave this up to Mike to discuss, but
They don't seem to be actually finding kilns. You might find a ceramic workshop, but not the ceramic kilns.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't know. We've never found a kiln. The only kiln I know of in Oaxaca is a classic period kiln that was founded at Zompa by Nelly Robles, and it was astounding because it looked exactly like a contemporary kiln in Coyotepec community, Zapotec community, and that produces all the blackware from exactly the same clay. Now 2,000 years later, so, but we just don't have, I don't know, we just don't know enough about, I mean, that's why we have Anna Brandeberry doing this research at El Zotes. But I haven't talked to her more recently about any of this. I'm interested if anybody out there knows more about this as Jim is bringing it up.
All right. Well, I see no more questions. So thank you, John, so much.
Yeah.
This program. I think you have thrown out some new ideas for people to ponder, and your reference will be showing up in other people's papers in the future.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity to give me such a broad platform. I really appreciate it.
And thanks to everybody who showed up and who's still hanging out. And with that, I think I'll end the program. So thanks again, everybody. It's been really great.
Great to see everybody. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching this Aztlander presentation. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To subscribe to free monthly issues of the Aztlander Magazine of the Americas, contact your host, Jim Reed, at mayaman@bellsouth.net. Thanks again.